Hello and welcome to the inaugural episode of Beyond the Badge. I'm Peter Koutoujian, Sheriff of Middlesex County, and I'll be your host. In coming episodes, we'll introduce you to the Middlesex Sheriff's Office and its people, and I'll have guests here to talk about a wide range of public safety issues. But on today's show, we'll be focusing on issues related to domestic and teen dating violence. This past January marked the 10th anniversary of the first National Stalking Awareness Month, which was created in an effort to bring awareness and attention to a crime that victimizes 6.6 million adults in the United States each year. And February was the 4th anniversary of National Teen Dating Violence Awareness and Prevention Month. Nationwide, 1 in 10 teens suffers physical violence at the hands of a boyfriend or girlfriend each year. That we need months dedicated to each of these issues should signal just how significant each problem is. Yet there's probably not enough public discussion or understanding of either. Joining me today to talk about these important issues are Laura Van Zandt, Executive Director of Waltham-based REACH Beyond Domestic Violence, a service agency for victims of domestic violence. Through advocacy, education, and by providing services for victims, REACH is affecting real change in our community. And Malcolm Ashley, whose 18-year-old daughter, Lauren Dunn Ashley, a graduate of Wayland High School, was murdered in 2011 by her former boyfriend. Malcolm, with Lauren's mother, Mary Dunn, have created the Lauren Dunn Ashley Memorial Fund, whose mission it is to promote dynamic educational programs. Thank you both for joining me today.
Thank you, Peter.
Laura, for the first question, we've known each other for many years working on the issue of domestic violence and teen dating violence, and it seems that we're speaking a little bit more about it now. Are we speaking about it more now than we were 5 or 10 years ago? And in any case, has the conversation changed?
I think the conversation has changed. There is an understanding of the dynamics of domestic and dating violence, and that it includes behaviors and patterns of behavior. And that is different than believing that it's just about a husband hitting a wife. So we know that it's more complicated. We know that there's more subtle behaviors, many of which don't fall under illegal category. And so it really is important to have family and friends and healthcare providers and clergy and everybody understand what those signs are, and we're doing a better job of helping people
And you
understand
believe that these non-governmental organizations seem to have a better understanding?
We're working hard to make sure that they do, but we're trying to change the conversation so that it isn't a matter of intervention in an unsafe way, but maybe intervention in a thoughtful way, holding someone accountable for their abusive behavior, supporting someone who is struggling with abuse.
And you've spoken a little bit about some non-criminal behavior. We think of domestic violence as being the crime itself. Mm-hmm. You spoke a little bit about the non-criminal behavior. Could you tell us a little bit more about what you mean?
Well, oftentimes the techniques that are used to assert power and control over a partner by an abuser are behaviors that aren't necessarily illegal. For instance, it might simply be awful behavior that alienates family and friends. It might be things as manipulative as telling someone that other people don't like them. It might be things like stalking, but being very careful to come short of violating the law. Mm-hmm. It's about things as as little as we might think, that not giving someone a phone message so that people start to believe that their family and friends are falling away from them. So all of those behaviors add up and affect self-esteem, affect isolation, and that's that helps an abuser maintain the control that they're looking for.
And it's about that isolation, it's about that control for domestic violence. Yep. It's not only the physical violence itself, is it?
Exactly. There was a survivor once said that if he had hit me first, then I would have left. But by the time he hit me, I thought I deserved it.
That is very powerful.
Very powerful.
Wow. Malcolm, I reached out to you a few weeks ago, and when we're speaking about this, and I think part of what I'd like to speak about today is what you're engaged in trying to help many families and communities with right now, and how it then develops as time goes on. That's about the issue of teen dating violence. And I connected with you just a few weeks ago when I was writing a monthly column that I write on teen dating violence. Teen Dating Violence Awareness Month was this month. And your daughter was a victim of teen dating violence. And oftentimes in these situations we speak about the perpetrator and who the perpetrator is and what the perpetrator did. And all too often we forget to speak about who the victim of a crime was. Could you please tell us a little bit about your daughter, who she was as a person, not just a victim of a crime?
Lauren was a very self-confident, self-possessed young woman who loved laughter and loved life. We use the phrase, live life to the fullest. It's easy to use, but she did. Had many interests and had a generosity of spirit. It wasn't a spotlighted item, but she just wanted to fix things and wanted things to be better. Those were important parts of her, along with her laughter and her singing.
And not the type, from the way you described, the type of person that one would, in ignorance, say, doesn't sound like a victim of a relationship violence situation.
No, and I think often we can overdo that image of a young woman as a potential victim. The fact is that everyone is craving a relationship they can depend on, in which they'll be valued and treasured, and we need to do a much better job at educating young people, I think, as to what's dangerous within that, and dangerous in a healthy sense of knowing what the risks are within any part of life. And relationships, they're tricky.
Yeah. Peter, I think Malcolm makes a really good point. Oftentimes when we get into a dating relationship, it's really exciting because this person wants to spend their time with us, and they want to know what we did during the day, and they want to tell us that they love us all the time. And it can feel really, really good. And what we need to be talking about is, when does it start to feel not so good? And when do you start to wonder about it? And what is the language that we can use to support each other in, holding fast to those boundaries and maintaining our own values, so that we can be the person that we want to be and be loved by someone else because of that.
Which is so difficult to do when you're beginning in your inaugural.
It's hard for adults.
It's hard for adults. You're absolutely right. And we all,
Yep.
I think I wrote in the column, we all crave love and attention and security. We all crave these things. And what has always concerned me as a legislator and as sheriff is the fact that with teen dating violence, you can develop your ideas of what a healthy relationship is, and it may not be a healthy relationship, but then can be continued to carry with you the rest of your life. Do you find that, Laura?
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Oftentimes, that first relationship forms your belief, or maybe it's what you witness in your home, or maybe it's what you learn from TV and what your friends reinforce. And a lot of that information cannot necessarily lead you in the right direction. And sometimes we talk to people who may have been in the same relationship for years and years and years, started when they were young and it's become abusive, or people who, I had a conversation with a woman once who said, I grew up in a house where my parents were so loving and respectful of each other that when I got into a relationship with my boyfriend, I didn't recognize these behaviors because I just assumed that everybody treated people the way that my parents treated each other. And so I think it can go both ways. You can grow up with a model that's not healthy, or you can grow up without information that helps you understand what is a red flag.
It's interesting because so often we feel as a former prosecutor that it's a model that you replicate from your own family, and yet it may not be, especially if your first relationships are not healthy ones. You may not develop an understanding of what a healthy one is.
Laura's already touched on this point too, but it's not how the relationship is just at the beginning. It changes as time goes by, and someone had said to me, is the relationship opening up the world to both people, or is it in fact shutting down for one person? And that's, I think, one of the warning signs to look for within relationships.
That's a great overall way to sort of capture what can happen. And Laura, I don't know if you've got sort of a few elements of what to watch out for. I think that's a really great way to say it. Is it opening up or is it closing down for people? And that's exactly what happens in many of these relationships, is that cycle of domestic violence or cycle of isolation and abuse can happen in ways that we're not aware of, in closing down that world for us. How does that manifest itself?
Well, I think we can think of a lot of examples of that and just hold that framework in our mind. So if it's a young person who formerly loved playing a sport and now no longer wants to play that sport, and maybe it's because that time interferes with when their boyfriend or girlfriend has time for them, that might be a warning sign. If someone used to really enjoy going out with lots of friends and now really only has a very small circle, it can affect schoolwork. It can make people, sometimes people show a little bit of nervousness about not calling back or not texting back to their partner quickly. They might be nervous about being seen with someone else who might not be well liked or might make their partner jealous.
How about the way they dress, their grooming?
Oftentimes, it can go either way. I mean, they can be much more fastidious, and it might be because so and so likes it when I do this. One young woman said, that she loved it because her boyfriend always went shopping with her, and it was so much fun before she realized that he was picking out all her clothes. And so oftentimes the behavior can feel very doting, very caring, but then it goes too far. And having the language to be able to articulate that and being able to access someone that you can talk to becomes really important.
And Malcolm, I know that part of what you're trying to do is speak about the issue of teen dating violence on many levels. And in many ways, you're speaking to the potential perpetrators as well as to the victims, and then also the relationships overall.
Right.
Can you tell us, and I remember there was a very powerful moment, I know, after a court hearing where you had reached out to the parents of the perpetrator, which was a really emotional moment, not just for yourself and them, I know, but for the world, because there were a lot of people that looked at your courage and your compassion as just models, as a model for what life is about. Could you tell us a little bit about maybe that moment, and also then speaking with parents and/or perpetrators?
Well, that moment, and again, we've touched on these topics already. People from the beginning were designed to connect with other people. It's evident in the first 24 hours of life of a baby and the mother, the eye contact that goes on. And from there on, it's a caring, craving process, but that's also fraught with risks. And one of my concerns and what we work on through the foundation is how we can promote a dialogue about this, about relationships, about deep self-confidence, deep self-respect, and trying to build those skills both in ourselves and those around us, because those are the foundations of sound relationships. And we don't do enough, in my view, in schools from early on to focus on that. Skills and relationships, building of character, which have always been the missions of schools, we stepped away from that, and in my view, we need to return to those topics.
It's so important. I mean, here in Middlesex County, there is a great deal of attention paid to success in school, helping kids be successful in schools. We spend a lot of time focusing on MCAS and other performance. And yet when you get down to it, in order for a child to be successful in school, they need to feel supported. They need to have healthy relationships in their life. And so much of the time that we spend focusing on, the actual classroom performance seems to devalue the time that we may have spent on helping them understand how to be supportive of each other, how to kind of love themselves first,
yes,
and how to take care of each other in a way that will make them better people as they go forward, hopefully with a sound educational base.
Right.
But you really wish that we could dedicate the kind of energy that we do to schoolwork, to helping them build, I think as Malcolm talks about, compassion, because when you lose track of that connection with other people, then really all the other stuff is not as important, because how are you going to be a great business person? How are you going to be a great artist? How are you going to be, any of these wonderful things that they're studying to be, if you don't have the ability to connect with other people. And so it's really remarkable work that the foundation is doing, and I think it's consistent with the way that we approach the conversations that we have with young people when we're in schools. We don't say, you could be a victim, you could be a perpetrator, these are the things you need to learn. Instead, it's, what are your personal values? What's important to you? And what do you want out of a relationship with another person? And then some language. How are you going to talk about that? How are you going to ask for it? How are you going to maintain those boundaries that are so important to you? If you really love music, if you really love your friends, if you really love Friday dinners with your family, things as simple as that, how are you going to maintain that? And how are you going to think to yourself when some of that starts to get impacted by a relationship that you're in?
You're right. I think we, in the schools, we are tending to drive towards the academics. And then off school time, we're driving towards athletics now too, and everyone is being driven to become better and better in the athletics, and that's you can join with the community, it can be isolating too, because you're really not spending downtime. You're spending structured athletic time where you're driving your children to specific sporting events and practices, and they're really not doing that downtime. Actually, some of the best downtime that I have with my children are driving them someplace over a longer period of time where you get to just sit and speak with them for a period of time, and those are my most treasured moments.
That front seat, back seat conversation
Aren't they wonderful?
A really good time to ask some of those questions that are hard to, those conversations that are hard to have face to face.
That's right, the ones that you've been meaning to speak with them about, but you can't do right there. You're right, so you're right. You don't have to look at them directly. You say, hey, what's going on here?
And they don't have to look at you,
that's right too. That's right, and they can be a little bit more open. One of the things that we've spoken about before, and Malcolm, I've expressed some of my own concerns about, and Laura knows my concerns for a long period of time, is the issue of bullying versus teen dating violence. And the differences, but also the some of the similarities, but really the differences in what maybe not is worse, but what may or may not be longer lasting throughout a lifetime. Do you have any thoughts about those?
I think they're so closely related, and Laura and others who've been at this longer than I have may have views that bear on the matter. The issue of confidence is critical in there. I've already touched on that, and the reverse of it, which I think we need to do a much better job keeping track of, and which James Skelligan, who was head of mental health services for the prisons in Massachusetts for 20 years, focuses intensely on the topic of shame, and that shame is often down there at the bottom, along with shame of shame, so it's sealed over. And it's very hard for anyone who wants to help to get access to help a young person who's struggling with shame. And I think our schools need to be more attuned to it, both on the positive side of building deep self-confidence, but on the other side of looking for kids who seem to be experiencing shame, because that by itself can lead to the kind of bullying you just touched on, and in my view is one route up to being very controlling in a relationship. If you're afraid that relationship's going to end, if you're afraid you're not going to be able to have another relationship because of feelings of shame, then you're have the potential of heading down a controlling road, and in fact wrecking the relationship that you're craving.
I've never thought about the issue of shame in a relationship in that very way, but that's pretty powerful. And what do you think, Laura? I mean, sometimes it seems to me that once you leave certain settings, the bullying can overall end in that close kind of academic school environment, and it can happen in different ways. But it seems to me that once you learn, or once you feel that you learn what a healthy relationship is, which may be an unhealthy relationship, that can track with you for the rest of your lifetime too.
It can, but I do think that Malcolm made a very good point in terms of where those behaviors come from. And someone who does feel a deep sense of shame, someone who feels a lot of concern about not being able to, someone who needs to have someone be less than, I think is a deep part of a lot of the behaviors that we see that all intersect in bullying and intersect in intimate partner violence. The reality is that when two people can find mutual respect and have respect for themselves and respect for other people, then behaviors like that aren't necessary. As you're a child and you're growing up and you're going through developmental phases, you're trying to figure a lot of things out. And so there are some behaviors that happen when someone's 5 that with proper reinforcement, again, it's developmental, they grow through it. And some of that has to do with having a trust and an understanding that people will be there for you and that you can be safe in your surroundings. And so some of that plays into it too. If you think about all the time that we spend talking about bullying when they're younger, then we just kind of stop talking about it, and we don't always add the added component of what happens if there is intimacy. And so we're having the bullying conversation, but then when things get, as they say, a little more complicated, we really don't give kids enough of that conversation about what does it mean. You see the mean girls when, at some points, and you try to figure all that stuff out. As they grow into these relationships, they're still going to have these dynamics where they have to figure that out and how to treat each other, and we need to do more to support them in that.
So how is it that we start to really address the issue of teen dating violence and domestic violence? Laura, maybe start with you, and then we can speak about the Lauren Dunn Astley Memorial Fund. What are the things, the tangible things we can begin to do with specifics for individuals, for communities? What might those be?
Sure. Well, there's lots of different ideas, but being a good friend, being a good neighbor, being a resource to people is we think is very important. In Waltham, in fact, we're in the middle of Say Hi Week, which is a community organizing initiative that we are in the third year of, where just saying hi to your neighbor can make a big difference in terms of reducing the isolation that people might be feeling and makes it easier to reach out for help. We like to think about how clergy and healthcare providers, as well as friends and neighbors, might be able to safely hold people accountable for behavior that they might be utilizing with their partner, and find ways to support their partner. Are you okay? How you doing? Those conversations make a difference. It's not going to happen right away, but it lets someone know that there's a connection there and that they can reach out for help if they need to. With kids, a lot of it is modeling, showing kids what a healthy relationship looks like with your partner, and then also taking opportunities like the stuff we see on TV and the stuff we hear in songs and saying, what do you think of that? Sometimes you'll be surprised by what you hear.
That's right. And you had spoken about the Say Hi, the program. Can you tell us a little bit about that? And then that can be replicated throughout, cities and towns throughout this Commonwealth as well. And I think you're right. And then if you do make that connection and someone does start to speak about being in a bad relationship, an unhealthy relationship, or an abusive relationship, I'm assuming that they shouldn't go and engage with the perpetrator. How should they handle themselves at that level?
Good point, Peter. Oftentimes, people feel like they don't know what to do if someone shares with them what's happening in their relationship. And there are resources, obviously, like Reach Beyond Domestic Violence. We have a 24-hour hotline. We have a website with a lot of information. There's a statewide hotline, SafeLink. So there's places that people can reach out. Don't feel like you have to have all the answers for a friend. Just being someone who will listen to them and someone who will validate what's happening to them. Oftentimes, survivors of dating and domestic violence feel like they're the only person this has ever happened to, and it must be their fault, and they must be going crazy. And
just connecting with them empowers them.
Yes, connecting with someone and hearing, no, it's not just you.
Right.
is really helpful. But reaching out for a professional resource is great. In terms of Say Hi, I think what's neat about Say Hi is that it really came out of the Waltham community. So I think there are probably other great ideas out in communities all over the Commonwealth, and sometimes it's just a matter of taking a moment to try to figure out what they are.
Well, I remember in a recent case of significant domestic violence, I think it was a homicide, that a friend of the perpetrator said, I said hello to him every day, but did I really know what was going on in his life? And I think that was the answer to the question, was right there. No, he didn't really know what was going on in his life.
Peter, I think that's so important, and focusing on connectivity, as Laura's working on within the Waltham community, to focus on that with young people in school, pre-K on. The desire for connection and friendship is key in young people, and they need help with that hardest of human experiences of when a friendship ends. That's where the language needs to be developed with very young children.
Right.
And then that's the foundation for when they begin to consider dating, and that word isn't used much anymore,
right.
But connecting more intimately. and then facing breakups, which is the most devastating experience
Right.
human beings have.
I remember those breakups. They were very
Everybody
powerful,
does.
yes.
We all do.
Devastating.
With despair. But we don't provide education about that. We don't provide information. We don't provide scaffolding in schools, and we could. There's a lot that could be done.
And tell me, we've only got a couple of moments left, Malcolm, but tell me about the Lauren Dunn Astley Memorial Fund. And we've
Right.
been showing subtitles, so how to connect with it. But tell us what you're hoping to do in just a moment and how people can connect with that fund.
Thanks so much. Its number one focus is promoting educational programs in effective relationships and violence prevention. And we're working on that on numbers of fronts, just encouraging schools. On March 14th at Lincoln Sudbury, there'll be a coming together of 200 students from 20 different high schools to focus on the question of healthy, effective relationships and violence prevention. And we're working on legislation to support pilot programs and to showcase them and to consider how to tuck these things into the anti-bullying work so we don't have to start a whole new initiative.
That's great. And so to check out the website and then
Yes.
to take action from there.
Please.
And Reach Beyond Domestic Violence, same thing, Laura?
Yes, we've got a lot of helpful information on our website. We actually created some really useful cards. Part of it was inspiration from Malcolm. We call them our tip cards that have information about how to talk to your kids at very different ages, 3 to 6, 7 to 10, 11 to 14, and 15 to 18.
That's great.
These are conversations we could be having every day.
Very specific for
Don't
each
wait
age
for the
group.
talk.
That's right. And I think it's important to note that each community will have, in some cases, its own domestic violence service agency that they connect with as well in their locality, or they can reach out to yours and find out a local group that can help them out as well.
That's right. We're all members of Jane Doe, which is the statewide coalition.
Great. Thank you very much for your work here today, and thank you for your service. If you want to thank, I'd like to thank Laura and Malcolm for joining me today to talk about these very incredibly important issues. And I'd urge everyone in our audience to visit the websites for both Reach Beyond Domestic Violence and the Lauren Dunn Astley Memorial Fund to learn more. And at this point during each of our episodes, we want to introduce you to a particular person or aspect of the Middlesex Sheriff's Office we think you should know about, or that you might find interesting. Here to present today's MSO Spotlight is Megan Lee.
Thanks, Sheriff. Our first MSO Spotlight is on Lieutenant Jim Minnelli in Records and Receiving at the Middlesex Jail. A 24-year veteran of the Middlesex Sheriff's Office, Lieutenant Minnelli has served in a number of positions, starting as an officer working on a tier. He has also served as a day reporting officer. Currently, he is the lieutenant in charge of Records and Receiving at the Middlesex Jail in Cambridge. Here's Lieutenant Minnelli to explain more about Records and Receiving.
And what we do here is we intake the new commitments to the Cambridge Jail or to the pre-trial of inmates. We usually do close to 8,000 new intakes a year for pre-trial. Our current pre-trial count is in the 780 number right about now. We do photographing, fingerprinting. We work with closely with other law enforcement agencies.
With the Middlesex Jail in Cambridge slated to close later this year and relocate to Billerica on a temporary basis, we also asked Lieutenant Minnelli what he'll miss about working in the facility.
Well, I've worked here a long time. I've been in this building for almost 20 years, so it's a smaller facility. You get to know the staff a lot better. When we go to Billerica, it's a more widespread. So that's one thing I'll miss. The size of the facility is nice and small. You get to know all aspects of it by being here.
Thanks to Lieutenant Minnelli for sitting down to talk to us about Records and Receiving. Now back to you, Sheriff.
Thank you, Megan, for that first MSO Spotlight. I look forward to our future segments. And thanks to all of you for joining us on this inaugural episode of Beyond the Badge. I hope you'll tune back in for future episodes. But until then, remember, life is full of choices. Please make good ones.
All right, you ready for some baseball trivia?
Let's do it.
What year produced the most no-hit games in the big leagues?
7 no-hitters in 1990.
Wow, that's right. Now a question that's not trivial. How many children will witness bullying this year?
Huh.
The answer? 3 out of 4.
75%?
That's
Wow.
right. How many of them will say something?
Kids want to help, but don't know how. Teach them how to stop bullying and be more than a bystander.